So welcome to the People Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things people performance. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with me, the founder. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have the performance episodes delivered by the T2 consultants. If after listening to our podcast, you want to get in touch with T2 about anything we do, please contact us at help@trans2performance.com. You can stream or listen to our podcast on all the usual platforms available. So for now, sit back, tune in, and enjoy the People Performance Podcast. So welcome to another Leader Lounge episode with me, Martin Johnson, the founder of T2. Today, we're going to be focusing on the science behind all human motivation. And in order to do this, I'm going to talk to you about the 3 core functions of human existence. The reason we do this is because in every single coaching session or workshop we do here at T2, we explain the evolutionary reasons behind why we are motivated to do certain things. So let's start right at the beginning. Hunter-gatherers started evolving 70,000 years ago in the cognitive revolution. And what started that was as the brain started evolving through the use of fire, learning to cook food in the fire, which meant our digestive system shrunk and our brains grew. We then went through the cognitive revolution, which meant we learned to build tools, hunt, farm, and the rest is history. But along the way, as our brains evolved, we were trying to fulfill 3 core functions of existence. And this forms the motivation behind all of our behavior. The first core function of human existence is survival. And if you think about this, millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, as the species was evolving, we had to be able to survive every single day. Self-preservation was our number 1 role. And so the brain evolved to be highly astute at recognizing danger and threat. You had to be able to spot the saber-toothed tiger in the long grass, berries poison, fire burns, don't walk off the edge of a cliff. All of that stuff which presented a danger to us. So we've carried this survival instinct throughout evolution. And even present today, it's our brain's number 1 innate function, but it just manifests slightly different. The way it does this is the brain produces neurotransmitters, or chemicals as we like to simplify it to, and it floods the brain and body with a chemical that makes us feel in a certain way. In terms of survival, this is cortisol and adrenaline. So you might have heard of these neurotransmitters. A lot of people have heard of adrenaline. Adrenaline releases into the body to prime our muscles with blood flow, to tunnel our vision, and to get us ready for the fight or the flight. And a lot of people have heard that response, that autonomic nervous system response, that fight or flight response in us. Cortisol floods the brain to create that neuroticism, that switch on something carries risk or is important. And again, the 2 together as a recipe, as a concoction, they're designed to get us focused on the threat. So survival is our innate number 1 instinct, and it's the fastest part of the brain to react in any situation if we feel under threat or in a situation that carries consequence. What's really interesting about this is we humans have evolved to be able to have 2 types of survival mode. One is physical, i.e. something is happening in the here and now that presents immediate danger to myself. So that's a real threat. Or what the brain is very clever at is perceived danger. So we've evolved to be able to predict what might cause us a threat or put us in a survival mode. Now, I'll come back to this because this is really interesting. It's probably what causes us in the modern day life more anxiety and worries than anything else. So practical and physical survival mode is something's happening in the here and now and I can see and feel it and it's real and therefore it's making me feel uneasy and putting me in survival mode. Perceived is that my brain is thinking ahead and predicting what may happen to me in the future or in the not so near distant future that may present a threat to me. But all in all, the first core function of human existence is survival, because your brain is programmed through evolution to protect you at all costs, to keep you alive. And what once did keep us alive through real and present threats has evolved over the years to modern day thinking where we perceive threats more than ever. And that can cause us to have a skewed view of what immediate and present danger really does look like. The second core function of human existence is continuation of the species, or reproduction, as we call it. So yes, we've got to self-preserve and stay alive, but we've also got to find a mate and reproduce. Without that ability, our species would die off pretty quickly. So reproduction is hardwired into the brain. Desires and attraction is hardwired into the brain. And just as pain, or moving away from pain, is our survival instinct, moving towards and experiencing pleasure is highly designed for reproduction. So the pleasure system is really important in terms of reproduction and continuation. Now, the interplay between survival and reproduction is also quite interesting, and science has evolved over the years for us to be able to study this. What happens when we have children? So we do reproduce, we have our tribe, our offspring are born, and what happens in us as adults is the survival mechanism goes through the roof. It heightens. Our sensitivity to dangers goes through the roof. And so we experience more neuroticism and potentially more anxiety than we ever did before having kids. So if you're watching this and you've ever wondered why, after having children, you are literally terrified of everything, get down from there, chew your food. This is a danger. It's because your survival mechanism is now higher than it once was. Your cortisol and adrenaline release almost is more sensitive because it picks up on more dangers because you're carrying the burden of survival on behalf of the little ones. So the survival reproduction interplay is an incredibly important thing to understand. So the first two core functions of human existence are survival, which is away from pain, and reproduction, which is highly governed by towards pleasure. However, once the offspring are born, it ramps up the away from pain mechanism because we carry that burden of protection, caregiving, and survival on behalf of the little ones. Now let's bring in the third core function of human existence, purpose. Purpose is an interesting word, and a lot of people talk about having purpose. In a separate Leader Lounge episode, which is coming next, I'm going to talk about sense of purpose, which is a slightly different thing. But purpose, it's very much governed by the pleasure system. But if you think about the hunter-gatherer tribe hundreds of thousands of years ago, the tribe had to organize themselves into roles. And we've done this through centuries of evolution. We have to have a role or a sense of belonging, which gives us purpose as an individual. So back then, it was a very simple equation. You would have the hunter, the leader, the forager, the caregiver, and the tribe would organize itself into roles. And what that did is it gave each person within the tribe a purpose. They would get up every morning and they would know how they contribute to the tribe. In turn, that would mean that there was a value to the tribe and the leader. And if you fast forward to today, in modern day life, we've come through the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the scientific revolution, and now the digital and intelligence revolution. And we have large cities and communities, and we've managed to be able to live amongst hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And life is much more complex than it was before. But purpose is still incredibly important to human beings. This is very much driven around the motivation to achieve fulfillment, pleasure, and reward. And for us, having a purpose, a sense of contribution, we get up in the morning and we know why we exist. We know what we're going to achieve. Is hugely important for the human psyche. And therefore, what we can conclude is if you think about the three core functions of human existence, survival, reproduction, and purpose, we can govern that all human motivation is either towards pleasure and reward, purpose primarily, and in the early days, reproduction, or away from pain and danger, survival, and then looking after the tribe. And no matter how sophisticated you think you are as a human being or how intelligent, that is as simple as your brain is operating at a primary level. Away from pain and danger, survive, towards pleasure and reward, purpose. And if anything is slightly out of balance in your life, the answer will probably lie in one of those two. forget reproduction for a second, and we know the tribe presents that additional responsibility for survival. But if you just take at an individual level survival and purpose, if you're feeling down or you're feeling not your best or you're struggling, I would look at the question of those two. Am I in survival mode? Do I feel under threat, or am I worrying about consequence or what may happen? Or do I lack purpose? Am I not connecting with something that gives me pleasure and reward and fulfillment in my life? The scales have to be balanced between pain and pleasure. I talk about it in the book, I Am Human, Pain and Pleasure. We can't spend too much time in one. We can't be in survival mode all of the time, because the release of cortisol and adrenaline will just change our system and leave us in this perpetual state of stress, worry, and anxiety. And more so, one of the biggest problems we face in the modern day life is we can't be seeking pleasure, comfort, and reward all of the time without ever having to endure any pain and suffering. Because then you get into this entitlism type mindset. And not only that, but you over index on the dopamine system, where you no longer can receive the same amount of pleasure from an activity that once gave you pleasure, because you are over indexing and overstimulating on it. The effects of the reward diminish over time. And so human beings have evolved pretty well by being able to balance survival and purpose pretty well. They're able to endure pain and discomfort and deal with challenge and adversity when it comes and settle down that survival system. But they're also able to have purpose, fulfillment, feel like they have a role and that sense of contribution. And therein the balance lies the balanced mindset of a human being, because all motivation is governed by pain and pleasure. And so whatever work you've done on yourself in the past, and some of you might have even done print profiling here with us at T2 or certain psychometric tests, and it tells you how you're wired and what you're motivated by. All human beings, when you strip it back to a simple form, are all governed by pain and pleasure. And that is because we are trying to fulfill the three core functions of human existence: survival, reproduction, and purpose. So hopefully that gives you a very quick insight into the core mechanisms and the science behind human motivation. Think about that. What we find is some humans are more governed away from pain and survival most of the time. And it actually takes for situations like that to mobilize them and motivate them into action. Some people are more motivated towards pleasure and goals and reward and fulfillment. And actually, they need that flag on the hill or a challenge or a goal to be able to mobilize and motivate them into action. Some human beings are split, but the balance is the key. We can't over-index on one. So however you're motivated, think about the balance in your life. Are you pushing yourself into situations that push you just enough? Or are you trying to seek pleasure, comfort, and reward all the time? And if you feel like you're in perpetual survival state because your brain's playing havoc with you and you're worrying about perceived threats and hypothetical worrying, then again, get in control of that, which we'll talk about in another podcast, and trying to reestablish and balance your skills is incredibly important. So that's the science behind human motivation. Remember, three core functions: survival, reproduction, and purpose. And therefore, the main message is all human motivation is governed by pain and pleasure. That's all for this podcast, and I will see you on another Leader Lounge episode shortly.